What up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy.
3, 2,
This has been Busy from the
1.
Burbs.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, a good friend of mine, Alex Streckel, a.k.a. Brain Police. Brain Police, musician and writer. Alex, I've known for some time, dating back to, 2003, 2002, and I've had the distinct honor and the pleasure to be able to both engage him in conversation and see him engage others in conversation. He's a prodigious intellect when it comes to economics, systems of government, and also an extraordinarily talented guitarist. It's not just guitar that you play too either, is it, Alex?
No, it is also drums and piano. Guitar
Right.
is just what I've decided to focus on most.
Yeah. Killer on guitar. I mean, guitar. That wasn't your first instrument, right? Wasn't drums your first instrument? And
Yeah,
then you.
drums is what I chose. Well, drums wasn't even my first instrument, but drums was the first one I sort of consciously chose, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But when I was a little kid, my mom had me take piano lessons, and I briefly played viola and things like that. But those weren't the instruments that I stuck with, if that makes sense. So I always say that I started with drums.
I see. I see. Well, what do you prefer?
What do I prefer out of what I chose?
Yeah, out of the range of instruments that you've
I guess for whatever reason I gravitated to guitar.
Yeah, right. You have, right.
But I still like to play drums.
Mhm.
If there was a drum kit around, I just don't have one.
Right. Well, thank you very much for coming on the program today. I appreciate it.
Definitely.
Yeah. I know your time is valuable, and I just wanted to get you on here to discuss, chop it up a little bit, see if we can't land on a topic that we might be able to vamp on, and for the edification of the listeners. Now, the listener base is it spans the spectrum of types of people. I have people from all different kinds of backgrounds, different kinds of ideological backgrounds, ethnic, racial, religious, or not a-religious backgrounds. So I look forward to having a good conversation with you. Now, in terms of what's happening in the news, obviously the big ticket news item is Paris and what happened recently in Paris. And also, one thing that was noted was that a similarly horrific attack took place in Beirut, and people were criticizing the response, saying, well, okay, we see this outpouring of support for France, but this also equivalently horrible attack took place in Lebanon, and
Right.
there was just silence.
Yeah, there were a number of different attacks that happened, and I've seen people make that very valid point that people are selective in what they choose to react to. Only whatever the media happens to focus on at the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very valid point, actually.
What would you have the media focus on? Do you feel like in our pre-interview we were talking about the debates, and you said, well, you try to stay away from them. Is that the case for most mass media?
Yeah, I would say that is true for myself. I mean, it might sound bad in a sense because I'm avoiding.
I don't think it's bad, actually.
Well, maybe not bad, but just insular or something.
Okay.
But yeah, basically, I avoid watching the news because after a point I found it to be a repetitive cycle.
Right.
And it's just the type of commentary and focus is shallow.
Yes.
And the term that my dad made up for it is infotainment.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
So
not even.
I
Yeah.
kind of approach it from a cynical perspective where it's like it's not going to. Anything that I hear, I probably will hear on the internet anyway.
Right. That's the same. You're of the same mind as the author, former quant or hedge fund trader, but he was rogue in the industry because he espoused like financial or fiscal responsibility as opposed to people that were just trying to drive companies into the ground or whatever in the economy. But Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who's the author of Black Swan and Anti-Fragility, he talks about how among a host of a number of things that any information worth getting, you don't need to get you don't have to watch the news to hear, and
It's very true.
like most of it's just noise.
It's noise, and when they do make an attempt to have like political discussion, it's my problem is that it just seems like the whether it's left or right, the way that the media covers politics is biased towards the establishment. They never strike to the root. Very rarely does anyone strike to the root of the issues or the system itself.
Right.
So it's always very shallow conversation. It's just like, oh, let's look at the polls and see, what politician's gonna win.
Right, exactly. All of this cookie cutter, like really plastic, artificial, disingenuine, like these polarized concepts that when you really like sit someone down, any given American, and you talk to them, you find that actually they're much more complex. Like there's a much more granular the nature of their personality, their likes, their dislikes, all of that. It's much more complicated than what the media would have us believe.
That's true. I often feel that way about the political personality tests that are out online, even the ones that make an attempt to have like more than one axis. I feel like they're oversimplistic and they put people into these silly categories.
What do you
And
think
it's
of that? That reminds me, Myers-Briggs personality test. Like, what is your
I mean, I think it's all right, I guess.
okay?
But are you talking about? Well, there's the Meyer-Briggs, and then there's the whole system that Young used or whatever, right?
Okay, yeah, that's right.
Um, the whole introversion and extroversion spectrum and all of that. I
Do you
think it's okay, but I always feel like the nature of the questions on tests is loaded.
Yeah, I mean that's like what I'm getting at is like, isn't all of this like new age kind of spiral dynamics, corporate psychology stuff? Isn't it just like astrology, like 2.0
You could
to
say
some
that,
degree?
yeah.
I just wonder how like how accurate it actually is. I don't know. So okay, where were we? So yeah, cookie cutter mentality, the media. So Bernie Sanders was recently challenged to a debate by Rand Paul. Did you hear about that?
I saw something about that when I was scrolling through my Facebook.
Yeah, I talked about it in the last podcast, but presumably, I call him Barry. Bernie is he had to sign this ridiculous agreement because, as we all know, Hillary basically controls the DNC. She controls the entire party. And in order to debate, he had to agree to these rules that restrict him from participating in any other debates other than those that are sanctioned by
That
the
are
DNC.
officially sanctioned by their party. So
Right.
right away we got a monopoly on discussion.
Right. How can we expect to have like a fair, honest, open, truthful, kind of progressive or whatever conversation when we're being the people are being hamstrung before they even get out of the gate?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Another thing I would note is that Bernie was taking a step of compromise by even going the Democratic route because he had no practical option.
Right.
He was an independent before all this. He had to run as a Democrat to even get his voice in there.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it speaks to the broken state of the system, I think.
yeah, I mean the only two parties. I mean that's ridiculous. At least certain other countries have like a dozen parties.
Right. All right,
But it's very
parliamentary
interesting to
system.
me that America is just two parties. It used to be a little more than that,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's just this two-party system. And of course, I think that the whole notion of representative democracy is an illusion, and I've been arguing that for years. But
Mm-hmm.
if you are going to try to have it, it's better to have more parties than two.
What is the system that we currently live under? Now, we call it a representative democracy, or what, it's a republic. But what is the United States now? Given that Princeton study that came out recently, they state that we are no longer a representative, a republic or a democracy. We are an oligarchy, corporate
Um,
oligarchy.
I think that we've always been an oligarchy. It's just that there's been different faces for it. I would suppose I would say,
Hmm.
but at least there was at least supposed to be some mechanisms in there stopping it from being an oligarchy. But yeah, I would say that we've always been an oligarchy. It's just certain people are waking up to that fact.
Hmm.
And my whole argument about democracy, representative democracy being an illusion, is that
Hmm.
it is a for representation slapped on top of an oligarchy. At
Hmm.
the end of the day, you still have this small group of people, all
Right.
of whom are rich and are a select elite group who are really running things.
Right.
And you every once in a while you get to cast your little vote to give your power over to someone else.
Hmm.
And
Right.
I guess in a way it makes sense in that it's impractical to have direct democracy for everything.
Right.
But at the same time, once you start signing away your rights of representation, you pretty much it almost seems like representation doesn't mean anything because at the end of the day, those people are making decisions on everyone's behalf,
Right.
and you don't really have any input.
I want to discuss like possible alternatives, and but one last point on that is that especially in the era of Citizens United, never before has it been this blatant, where it's like your vote really does not mean anything.
Right.
Um, Alternative systems. What are some of the alternatives? Are we talking about like maybe an artificial intelligence governing the country, akin to that in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? I think there's like a computer that helps assist decision making. Uh,
Interesting.
but like, what are some alternative systems of government? Specifically, I want to talk about anarchy, but like,
Right.
what would be a beneficial alternative to the system that we have today?
To be honest, it's kind of hard for me to give a good or thorough answer to that.
Okay.
But I could try to take a stab at it.
Yeah. Let's do a survey. Like, what are some alternatives? I want to kind of break outside of the mold of like your capitalist, socialist, communist kind of these systems which we've
Hmm.
known for some time. Like, what are some like, I don't know, hypothetical alternatives or just whatever, just vamp on systems of government or economic systems.
Sure, sure. I guess I would say that. Well, you want to avoid the economic aspect, right?
I mean, yeah,
You're you're
whatever.
talking more just systems of governance.
I mean, systems of governance, but yeah, I guess we could start there and then get into the economics of it. Like I like what I like as far as alternatives are concerned. I like anarchism. I just feel like there are certain things about it, like for example, monopoly. Like, how do you resolve monopoly in an anarchic system? I don't know.
That's a very good question. I would say if you're an anarcho-capitalist, you don't, and
Right.
you actually support a government, and even though you think you don't,
Hmm.
uh, and you have a bunch of bullshit, convoluted arguments from the 19th century to try to argue that a free market doesn't lead to monopolies.
Right.
And then you suggest private protection agencies, and they're really the same thing as a government.
This is the Stefan Molyneux proposed system. For those who may
Yeah,
not
I
know,
mean,
is that
I'm sorry to be such a cynic. I mean, I'm
no?
it's
It
so
needs to be
as soon
said.
as you started asking me the questions about alternatives, it's just my mind went blank, and I'm like, My intuition is always to criticize everything and not give a solution.
Right, that's good. So maybe I should have asked you just to give a critique, right? So
Yeah,
what
I'm much better. I've said this for a while. I'm much better at criticizing things than actually giving you an alternative.
Very well. Well, what are the like flavors of anarchy? People have the wrong impression of anarchy. Number one, from the jump, I'd like to state for our listeners that true anarchists proceed forward from the principle of non-aggression. Right. This kind of forms the bedrock, the foundation, the cornerstone from which any sensible anarchy should proceed. Right. But within anarchy there are these multiple flavors, right? So we have anarcho-capitalists, we have anarcho-primitivists, we have minarchists. Or like, what is minarchy?
Well, minarchists. I mean, from the years I spent with libertarianism, I had a phase in which I was a minarchist.
Mhm.
Um, and really, minarchists, I wouldn't categorize it under anarchism. There's always a clash between the libertarian anarchists and the minarchists. And the
Mhm.
minarchists are the ones who think that they sound a little bit more like classical conservatives in that they're like, okay, we need a minimal government that's just military, police,
Is
and
this
that's
like a
about it.
constitutional federalist, or like
Yeah,
Ron
you
Paul
could
kind of?
say that. I mean, yeah, Ron Paul's a good example. It's like he sort of occasionally has given lip service to anarcho-capitalism, and he hangs with those people, but
Mhm.
what he actually advocates is a very limited constitutional government
Mhm.
in which all it really has is the military and police and maybe a few other things,
Right.
and then everything else is abolished.
Right.
That's kind of the classical small government libertarian position, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, that author that I had talked about previously, uh, uh, he says that large governments, like federal level governments, have a really high fragility rating. He describes anti fragility as a quality of an effective system whereby when you expose it to pressure, when you negatively stimulate it, it doesn't break, it doesn't fold, it doesn't collapse, it becomes stronger. There's this quality, it's called hormesis. I talked about it in the last podcast with my friend Zach Stein, who's he's done a lot of thinking about standardized testing, education, and justice, injustice, and you need to design your systems, whether they're economic systems, educational systems, to have a really high anti-fragility rating. You need them to be not fragile. You need these things to be anti-fragile. It seems like he makes the same argument that large systems of government, that aren't like local, like like local state governments, those are the more robust or anti-fragile systems because I can't really explain the dynamic, but you have these other larger systems like the federal government, which is much more prone to fail. Like it's, I guess you'd liken it to like a pyramid, like this. I would have to liken it to a pyramid. That the stones at the bottom comprise like the base, the strength, the foundation, and without those, you can't have the capstone. It doesn't
Right.
exist.
Well, I mean, it sounds like what you're describing is the phenomenon that the larger an organization gets, the more disconnected it gets from its individual members, and you run into all of the
Hmm.
problems of bureaucracy, basically. It's so big that
Right.
there's communication breakdown and all sorts of things that happen.
Right. So in
And
terms of
that's true in economic organizations too,
such as
such as businesses and
capitalism
corporations and
or
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
corporations, okay.
One of
Yeah.
the interesting arguments of Kevin Carson is that
Who's Kevin
the
Carson?
Kevin Carson is a how would I describe him? He's with the left libertarians.
Okay.
And he's one of the writers at C4SS.com,
Okay.
Center for a Stateless Society.
Right.
I actually have some disagreements with him, but one of his compelling arguments is the anarcho-capitalists and the free market libertarians like to make an economic argument against um, bureaucracy in the government by saying that it has an information problem.
Mm.
And he what he argues is that that same argument applies to businesses, such that all the arguments that libertarians would make against government bureaucracy
Right.
applies to business bureaucracy.
Right. I
And
mean,
it seems very true.
it's true, especially coming from having spent 4 years kind of actually within the military and like experiencing bureaucracy from that perspective. Like there is very little difference between corporate practices and like that you would see in the private sector and organizational practices that you see being carried out within the military or within government agencies.
That
Like
doesn't surprise me at all.
no, yeah, right. I mean, you have like the same stuff being applied. Take Kaizen, or what is it called? Six Sigma, which is this means by which to achieve means by which to optimize workflow or whatever. Like it's just it's utterly corporate. It's total corporatism, like corporate psychology stuff, process improvement, but it's being applied in the military as well. Like these
It,
things
it,
are transferable.
it's interesting you say that because something that occurred to me when I was working at Guitar Center is that the guy who was the boss was applying. He was a former military guy, all right?
Yeah.
He was applying the things he got from the military to the workplace.
Right.
And something that occurs in the workplace, I think, is that people try to apply these social engineering principles that come from the military and the government to the workforce, and I think that's been true for a long time.
Well, this is a big argument against. I mean, this is a big argument for the free market and libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. I think because it's like, why even have the state if all the state is an additional layer, is like an intermediary between the market and the corporation. Like why have that higher layer that's giving out charters for corporations? Why not just start at the level of the corporation? Let the market dictate.
I can see what you're saying. Um, I guess the problem to me is that the corporation, in the absence, I mean, this might sound cliche, but in the absence of a pre-existing higher organization,
Right.
generally what happens is that those organizations take their place, or by default,
Ah, I see. They become that.
they become the same thing.
I'm reminded of like the East India Trading Company or something. Like
Yeah.
I would think that like at some point before the British government, because it was basically just an arm of the British government, right? Or the Dutch government or something.
Right, or something like that. Yeah,
They
I think it was the
just
British.
right. They just like kind of served in some way as a means by which to affect order that you would otherwise see being provided by a government. Like
Sure.
when they go into India or whatever, they provide security services, etc., to sustain their business. It's interesting to note. It's interesting to see this collusion, like you said. Like at some point, even if there wasn't a government, maybe a corporation would emerge to kind of fill that vacuum. Maybe that would
Not
happen.
only that, but like some of the things that certain anarcho-capitalists advocate, I don't think they realize that they are just they're skipping right to the point.
Right.
I mean, when certain people talk about like a private city or a what is it, like a homeowners association running things, it effectively is a local government.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So
I'm
it's
sure
just,
they don't
what's
like it
scary
when
to
you
me
point
about
that
it
out.
though is that when you put, no, they don't, but when it's purely private in the terms that they talk about, effectively it's a monarchy.
Right. Yeah, there's this strange. I've seen this the ghosts of monarchy kind of haunting the halls of the libertarian institutions. Like, what is that? how does that play? I don't really
It's
understand
strange.
that.
There's a guy named Hans Hermann Hoppe who wrote a book against democracy. I can't
Mm-hmm.
think of the name of it right now, but I
Mm-hmm.
once owned it and read it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some compelling arguments against democracy in there, but he also adds a bunch of bullshit.
Okay.
And he romanticizes monarchy in comparison to democracy.
Right.
And because it's all based on these notions of private property being inherently efficient.
What socioeconomic class is he from? Like, what's his background?
As far as I understand, he is an Austrian, maybe not he's either Austrian or German.
He was aristocracy though. Like
And
what?
yeah, he has connections to the aristocracy for
Right.
sure. Like if you look at the Mises Institute website and read on some of these people,
I've seen the Mises. Yeah.
he literally has connections to like the old aristocracy in Eastern Europe.
Right. So it just totally makes sense that he would be advocating this kind of sideways or like whatever.
And on top of that, he somehow rationalizes the argument that we need to think since we're in theory privatizing the
Mm-hmm.
land and the government
Mm-hmm.
in his vision,
Mm-hmm.
we need pure closed borders.
Pure closed borders.
Yeah, because the consequence of following pure private property of the whole country or whatnot is that it's treated just like a home, which means that no one could come in without your permission.
So this is like Donald Trump would like totally be all for
Exactly.
this.
That's
Like,
what that I spent years arguing against these people when I was more involved in the libertarian movement.
right. Because you
And
would
it's
like
just so
see these
bizarre
like.
that they use the logic of private property
Mm-hmm.
to get to anti-immigration
Wow.
and monarchy.
Crazy. I mean,
And they
these
still call themselves anarchists.
now. This reminds me of something. Are you familiar with the quote unquote Dark Enlightenment,
It sounds familiar.
the neo-reactionary movement?
Oh, that strikes a bell.
Yeah. What is do you formally know like what it is? Because I'm kind of new to it. What is the
um,
neo-reactionary movement?
maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm at the same level as you
Okay.
in that I'm not. I don't know a lot of detail, but I have an idea of what it is, and I've bumped into those types as far as it represents itself in what basically are reaction. Yeah, these sort of far right reactionary types.
I think this is exactly actually this plays. I'm reading the website now. This is almost exactly what you just described with the libertarians who were advancing notions of monarchy.
That
It's
doesn't surprise me, and also white nationalism.
exactly that's what was so weird. Okay, there's an individual um, back in 2009. I attended the Singularity Summit, which was put on by the Singularity Institute, which deals in like cutting edge technology and in different fields, so artificial intelligence, neuroscience, robotics, so on and so forth, genetics. And there was one of the organizers was this guy, what's his name, Michael Anisimov, and he seemed like pretty chill guy, like seemed pretty cool. This was 2009, and it was put on by him and another luminary. This guy was Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's pretty incredible, like really. I don't know. I think he's a good guy. He's
Hmm.
really well versed in artificial intelligence and really into logic and so on and so forth. He publishes a blog called Less Wrong. Anyway, Anisimov, then I joined the military. I served for 4 years, come out, find out that he is like now full bore neo reactionary. Um, he's pro homosexual rights, which I'm in total agreement with him on. But then
Sure.
he's very like he has these streaks of white nationalism that weren't there. Like the guy that I met in 2009 was cool, calm, collected, like pretty, for all intents and purposes, from what I could see, was very inclusive of different, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, etc. And now it's like completely changed. and he
It's
espouses
interesting
it.
because what you describe is exactly what I saw happen with a certain portion of the online libertarian community about 4 or 5 years ago.
Who are
And
they?
there
Yeah.
were people who, when I met them, they seemed like decent people who were, trying to get into radical politics and
Right.
expanding their views. And then before I knew it, there was this wave of people who were advocating what essentially was white nationalism.
Right.
And of course, the big person on YouTube at the time who really helped launch that was Stodels, or what was his other name? He went through so many names. Fringe
Stodels, I remember
Elements.
him.
Fringe Elements was the name he really was known by.
Yeah.
And like he managed to get people who were my allies to go to white nationalism, and it split the whole community.
So bizarre.
It
Like,
was it was very bizarre.
yeah. How do you like, for example, with Anisimov, like the whole Singularity Summit movement kind of coalesced around the release of Ray Kurzweil's book The Singularity is Near in 2000, between 2006 and 2009. And Ray Kurzweil, I don't understand how it plays, like how does white nationalism and Ray Kurzweil, who's Jewish, how does that how is that? That doesn't jive. That doesn't work. Like Ray would
It,
be
it,
like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And since Anisimov has been totally, so far as I know, been totally like fired or disowned or whatever
okay,
from the Singularity movement,
no
completely
surprise
separate
there.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand it. It's like,
Um,
how does
how
someone
how how do,
go?
how do people get there?
Yeah.
Um, it's a good question. I think when it comes to the libertarian movement in America, you have to realize that um, in the 80s and 90s, there was a calculated move on the part of certain libertarians to ally with the right wing.
Mm,
They allied with racially motivated groups,
mm,
and it was all because part of supposed to be sort of this loose alliance against the more authoritarian aspects of the left, I suppose.
mm-hmm,
But it ended up basically coalescing such that those people are a vocal part of the libertarian community.
mm-hmm.
And maybe they're not the majority, or maybe they're not
Ah, that's why.
representing the whole, but they're a sizable portion of it.
This reminds me of that scene from that Batman movie where he's like, in their ignorance they made a deal with the man they didn't fully understand or something. Like the libertarian movement got into bed with this
Those people infiltrated the libertarian movement, basically.
it was an
Well, that's
infiltration.
that's that's one aspect of it, but
Mhm.
another aspect, I look at some of the people who are libertarian intellectuals, and
Mhm.
they were always like that themselves.
Mhm.
Like if I look at Lou Rockwell and Hans Hoppe, if you go to LouRockwell.com, they have Gary North as a writer. If you know who Gary North is,
No.
he's basically one of those neo-Calvinist Christians who advocates bringing back public stonings.
Oh God.
So it's like, why are these people representing libertarianism?
Right.
Well, libertarianism, for whatever reason, got in bed with the conservatives since the 50s. That's why.
Yeah.
Libertarianism was reinvented in the 1950s. I mean, it meant something completely different to Europeans in the 19th century and the early 20th century. It basically was a bunch of libertarian socialists.
Okay.
And the meaning completely changed in America since the 50s.
But what was their relationship with the white nationalists, or who would have been the white nationalists in the 50s, which I guess was a lot of people. um,
It's interesting. I think it's maybe a somewhat of a vague thing where, people talk about the old right or whatever,
yeah.
and that's something that's romanticized by some American libertarians. And I think one aspect of the old right was the people who were opposed to World War II,
Right.
and there were some valid reasons to be opposed to World War II. But
Hmm.
the problem is that, just like, for example, like I'm pretty critical of Israel, right?
Right.
But in any group that you see that's critical of Israel, you'll always see the white nationalist types join in.
Right,
And
because they
in my
see, yeah.
opinion, they give a bad name to it. That's how I feel like about the old right of America, where it's like they had these people who were basically sympathizing with the Nazis
Yeah, they were
mixed
Nazi
in with
sympath.
them.
Exactly. Yeah, it's difficult. You have to kind of like parse. You have to kind of weed these people out, and it's on the movements to do so. But the thing is, there's like so much gray in any given closed group or any given group. Like Yanir Bar-Yam, he's the chair of the New England Complex Systems Institute. He does a lot of research on complex system dynamics, group dynamics, like how these things work. And there's just no clear way to, to select specifically certain people in order to, I don't know, either like exclude them from the group actively or, otherwise try and open a meaningful like channel of communication to kind of get them to listen to reason. That's the thing. Like
Right.
as long as we're not beyond reason, then we should have no problem. But it must have been difficult dealing with some of those people during that time.
Absolutely.
One thing that I wanted to note here as well was that the neo-reactionary movement, and this is it actually on the Rational Wiki page, there is a heading here for transhumanism. It says
Okay.
one of these ideas is not like the others. This one comes from neo-reactions linked to the Bay Area transhumanist subculture, and Anisimov is from the Bay Area. I think
That
he
says a lot to me.
what's that?
I don't want to overgeneralize, but
Go
the
for it.
Bay Area is where a few of the white nationalists who I felt were infiltrating anarchism came from.
No kidding. We might be talking about the same
Another
people.
big name for them is this guy named Keith Preston.
Okay.
And Keith Preston, one interesting thing about his approach is he exploits like what sounds like radical left-wing economic type ideas, and he mixes it with this neo-Nazism.
That's so
And
weird. Oh my
it
god.
goes along with the history of if you've ever heard of third positionism.
Yes, third positionism.
And
What is the third
it
position
almost
again?
like is this vague thing that tries to incorporate left-wing ideas into what is really neo-Nazism, basically.
That's all that it is.
Right. It's neo-Nazism with a left-wing tinge in some weird way, if
The
that makes sense.
it's so bizarre. It's interesting to see like the evolution. Like I feel like a scientist in a lab, like what do? Just take a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's like a potpourri of things that shouldn't go together.
Right, exactly. The heading goes on here. It says there are neo-reactionaries who will attempt to reconcile transhumanism and singularitarianism. We can discuss that later.
Interesting.
With taking the rest of society back several hundred years, particularly Michael Anisimov. He's actually cited in this article. The attempts are certainly creative, at least, and this is the same people that I was talking about. Despite Yudkowsky, that means Eliezer Yudkowsky, rejecting neo-reaction, MIRI, which is an artificial intelligence, I think Machine Intelligence Research Institute, MIRI's goal closely resembles the neo-reactionary goal, a single sovereign, friendly artificial intelligence ruling human space for all time for the good of all.
Wow.
Talks about mold bug, blah, 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 libertarian anarcho-monarchies. I mean, what is this? Like,
Yeah, it seems very bizarre, doesn't it, that people reconcile the idea that's supposed to be like absolute freedom with things like monarchy.
right.
It seemed really bizarre to me. I think part of it comes from confused people who are genuinely trying to come up with an ideology, but they have a mental problem. And I've ran into a few people like this on the internet where it almost felt like they were flipping through ideological labels at the rate of once per week.
Right.
And it's like these people have some weird problem where they play with ideologies.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it, I mean, that seems like a minor part of it because not everyone's crazy in that way. But I don't know. I think people just think themselves into some weird areas, and then maybe they have some of their emotional strings pulled by certain crafty individuals
Right. To get them to
to
even
hop on
entertain
board
these.
or whatever. Yeah.
It's craziness. This article, the neo-reactionary movement article on the Rational Wiki page, is actually really interesting. There's another part here. It says describes the alt-right.
Yeah, that's another term for much the same thing.
Right. It says the alt-right mob are the less intellectual end of neo-reactionary discourse and delighted to be so. These are the people who have wholeheartedly embraced the overt racism, misogyny, neo-Nazi affectations, bullying, and trolling of Chan culture as a lifestyle.
That's so interesting that they add bullying and trolling of Chan culture, because that's exactly what I felt like when I was on YouTube with the whole libertarian groups,
Well,
and I saw a certain segment of the community go over into this alt-right.
right. But didn't
And
we?
what I noticed about all of them is that they were all involved in mass trolling,
Right.
and all of them came from 4chan. Not all of them. A lot of these people hung around 4chan.
Right. Well, this is what I'm wondering though. Like, I've engaged in trolling as well, but it's
Sure,
like,
so have I in some ways.
right, yeah, but we're a different brand of troll. Like that's what I'm wondering is like,
These people seem like they're the type of troll who are like psychotically going out of their way to hurt people.
okay, yeah, these are like the bad. These aren't the posy trolls or like the
Does
funny
that
trolls.
does that make sense?
Yes.
And there's a difference between just okay, you troll for fun sometimes, whatever, or you're trying to get under someone's skin, whatever. But these people are like they come off like bullies.
They're yeah, right. The cyber bullies. They're doxing people. They're calling their house. They're calling their work. They're
I
don't
was
know.
doxxed by them when I um criticized the wrong people too much.
Yeah.
I ended up getting my YouTube account hacked and all my videos deleted.
What the fuck, man? I remember. I can't believe. I thought that you just like made all those videos private. You had tons of awesome videos. Are you serious?
Videos of me, and maybe I wasn't like a celebrity or something, but I was starting to, be a little bit of a small time intellectual.
There
on
was a
YouTube.
body of work there that was
Right. There was a
that
body
was
of work
growing.
there, and I had 2,000 subscribers. Not a lot, but I worked for
fuck?
those 2,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
And because Fringe Elements basically, and maybe some of these, maybe not just him, but he was one of the main people. But this community of trolls who became alt-righters, they decided to, get revenge against me, I suppose. And yeah, they took over my YouTube. They took over my Facebook. Tried to post stuff pretending to be me.
Wow.
They took over my YouTube, deleted all of my videos, and then put up a video pretending to be me, trying to publicly shame me.
Oh my god. And of course, like the irony with this is like these people are are they harmless in real life? That's the question I would like to know.
Well, and
actually.
that's the question that when that happened, to the extent that I was commenting on it, I was just like, "What's with the psychology of you people? Like,
Right.
you are nuts. Is this how you treat people in real life? And I mean, is it all that disconnected from real life? You basically just messed up someone's body of work
Right.
and tried to destroy their name.
Right.
And another thing they did, Fringe Elements did with another user, I believe it was Aaron0883. He made up some bullshit and tried to he made up some bullshit about the guy, and then online tied it to his business's name.
Okay, yeah. See, this is like actually crossing a threshold. There's
Yeah,
a
you're
point.
trying to fuck with people's personal lives.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Because they disagree with you on the internet.
That's yeah.
It's
I
very
take umbrage
bizarre
with
to me.
that. That's crazy. It speaks to the psychology of the people that they would be willing to stoop to this. And I have I mean I personally with trolls, as you know, we kind of grew up or like have dealt with troll culture since its inception. Like I'm no
Sure.
stranger to to 4chan. I'm no stranger to the kind of whatever sense of humor or whatever the tactics, whatever.
Sure.
But I'm kind of anticipating like once this podcast gets released, like what the reaction is going to be, and I kind of like, I don't know. I'm just kind of curious. I would say that I'm kind of like gleefully anticipating what the
Well,
reaction will be, but I think it'll be
Well, why
rather
do you say
moot.
that? I guess.
I think it's just going to be rather moot. I think. Let's.
No.
I mean, it could. I don't know. It could turn on a dime. I mean, it could get really interesting, but I don't know. I don't think that. I think
Well,
that
I'm not saying there's something inherently wrong with 4chan or anything,
right,
but I do think there's a certain tendency for certain types of personalities to take it too far, perhaps.
right.
Um, and maybe sometimes the culture of that is encouraging of those personalities without intending it that way.
Right.
But
Well,
yeah, I don't know. It's
I'll
just
cross the bridge if I get there. If I start getting death threats in Gmail, I'll deal with it when it happens.
I highly doubt that.
Yeah, yeah. They tend to they go really far, but they won't go. There are some bridges even a neo-reactionary won't cross. Like it's kind of bizarre. That this notion that going back to the whole AI thing, that as it says here, Machine Intelligence Research Institute's goal closely resembles the neo-reactionary goal of a single sovereign, friendly artificial intelligence ruling human space for all time for the good of all. Like, if that's really what the neo-reactionary goal is, like, that kind of flies in the face of the white nationalism because obviously an artificial intelligence is going to see all human beings as equal, won't it? Like,
It would effectively be global,
right.
which is what they rail against. I would think.
Yeah, and then we'll see the neo-reactionary transhumanists then become anarcho-primitivist and like so strange. The evolution, de-evolution, the cycle of change of these arbitrary political distinctions. There was a lot there, though. It was interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty bizarre. It sounds like they're trying to go in whatever direction they can.
What what points do they make that make sense? Barring the the racism, the misogyny, these kind of obviously, I don't know. I wouldn't co-sign those things. I
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
endorse those things. But
I
what
wouldn't think so.
ideas do they have that actually make sense? Like the libertarian component, the anarcho-capitalist component. What?
I mean, how do I put this? This may sound funny,
Mhm.
but in a sense, my experience with those people led me to want to think. In my opinion, as a result of that, I saw a flaw in libertarianism itself.
Mm.
That it could, within its own logic, lead to those things.
Mm.
Means that there's something wrong with its premises,
Mm.
is what I concluded. And that's why I started making blogs like anti-libertarian libertarianism, where
Mm.
the whole point was nothing but to rip libertarianism apart from the inside
Mhm.
by examining its basic premises and being and re-questioning them.
How many
Like,
how many basic premises does it have? Is
I
it a
guess it depends
list?
on what aspects of it you get into, but as far as the property stuff, there's a lot of assumptions about property,
Mhm.
and that leads to a lot of really absurd conclusions, I think, when you try to be an absolutist about private property,
Right.
or you have these outmoded ideas about private property.
Mhm.
And on top of that, some of the mythology perhaps about free markets,
Mm.
in the sense that, as if it's just this self-correcting system that, and that you should accept whatever the consequences of market activity is on the assumption that it's free.
Mm.
But how free is it really?
Right.
And that's another line of thinking is the myth of the true free market. Um, because libertarians will often argue that, well, we don't have a true free market, so you can't criticize. But on the flip side, it seems like they're constantly using a theoretical model of a pure free market
Mhm.
that to compare modern society to. But aside from not really having a real example of one,
Mm.
um, yeah, the premises of that true free market are inconsistent with human psychology, in my opinion.
Mm. The free market. That we don't have a free market. That there's no example for one. So
Not just that, but that the assumptions of what a free market is utopian nonsense. There's never been one, and there never will be one.
I see. Except for like maybe like a South American tribe which has had no contact with civilization or something.
Yeah, it just seems to me that well, one of the on one hand, the work that someone like Kevin Carson does is he points out how much modern markets were the result of government interventions in the first place.
Right.
But on the flip side, I try to take that further and just say that the I guess some of the ideological premises of a free market just don't make sense. It's just like it seems to be based on a false model of human psychology to me.
Isn't the argument that if there was a free market, that market forces would dictate such that if there was a company that was producing medicine and then people started dying because they were taking that medicine, that the other company which was producing medicine that actually worked, like people would just buy that medicine, like that the best product would inevitably emerge, and that brings to light like questions
Well,
of monopoly, because
well,
then
that's true.
well, if it's
I
a
mean,
good
I guess
product,
yeah, you're going through one possible argument that makes sense.
like if it's a good product, what's wrong? Like for example, Google has a complete and total utter monopoly on search. People can talk about they use Bing all they want, they don't use Bing. Everyone
Yeah,
uses Google.
Google is the thing, just like
Right.
Facebook is the
And
thing.
Google's great, right?
It's all
That,
right.
well, that's
Yeah,
what
it
I'm
does what it
wondering.
does.
Like, at what point is there an excuse for monopoly if you have a superior product or service? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean,
It's hard to read. It's hard to parse that.
yeah.
What else do we have in terms of like the so I guess in libertarianism, maybe we can just put it to bed right now because
Well,
it's pretty good.
let me finish it off with this.
Yeah.
The idea that my last thought that came to me is that something that libertarians don't seem to realize is that markets are systems that individuals are embedded in too, just as much as governments. Markets and governments alike are social psychological systems, and freeing the market does not free the people. The market um, is no more detached from human dynamics as the government is.
Right.
And so talking of these things as distinct entities doesn't make sense in a way.
I see.
And it's just your power as an individual
Right.
in a market inherently limits your rights.
Right.
And there are contexts in which if you just default to the idea of letting economic power run its course, implicitly what you're supporting is power over people. And the big blind spot of modern libertarianism to me is that it doesn't recognize economic power. It criticizes government power and then tries to substitute economic power for it, and then talks about freeing the market. But the market is a limiting force on your decision making as an individual.
I see. With Citizens United, isn't this like the libertarian wet dream? Like, isn't this like now the private sector has complete unfettered ability to, basically buy whoever they want to buy as president?
Yeah, that's not good, is it?
No, it's not. But
I mean,
that's kind of
that's an example of taking it to extremes in a sense. Yeah,
right.
It's just now the government is up for the market.
Right.
In a sense.
So all of the libertarians, like, what this is
And
weird. Like Ron
here's
Paul
the
should
thing,
be like
that's all
applauding.
anarcho-capitalism reduces to.
Right.
The government is up to the market.
Right.
So it really isn't anti-government. But by the consequences of its own logic, it must accept whatever. If a monarchy arises as a result of the forces of private property working themselves out, they have to accept the monarchy. And that's partly how you get all of these weird ideas that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And that's also why I challenge the left libertarians, and I'm like, maybe you should throw away the libertarian logic in some ways.
Right.
Because you are still bound even if you might personally have arguments against it, you are still bound to accept within the logic of libertarianism
Mm-hmm.
consequences that as a leftist you
Mm-hmm.
oppose.
Right. Yeah,
And
it's
that's
so
weird.
strange. I mean, it's like a
Isn't that
Mobius
strange?
strip. It's like a Mobius strip. It's like disappearing into itself and coming back like its own worst nightmare. And it's like that Nietzschean quote, like "Be careful, you who battles demons, that you not become one." That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, unbelievable. We are at 55 minutes,
Oh well.
Alex. I want to thank you very much for coming on the program, first and foremost. We'd like to have you on at a future date if you'd like to come back.
Yeah, there are a lot of other places I could go.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the
I haven't
one. Yeah,
criticized the left yet, damn it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we could go. There's a lot more to talk about. I want to let people know about your YouTube page, Alex Streckel Guitar. YouTube.com, Alex Streckel Guitar, AlexStrekal Guitar. You have a bunch of. It's kind of like a notepad for you, isn't it?
You could say that, yeah. I mean, it's really just at the moment I haven't developed it very much, but it's mostly webcam videos of me putting down some ideas. Either I'm jamming to a backing track or I'm just making something up.
Are you in? Are you building? Are you recording anything now? Are you writing anything now? Like what's
Not especially at the moment. I kind of gig on and off,
okay?
and I am looking to put together a group of players so that I can officially write some original stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely looking forward to that. Very talented, talented musician you are. Um, so yeah, that's about all that I have. I want to implore anyone listening to this: if you were educated or entertained, not infotained, but if you found this podcast edifying, please click the PayPal link, donate. We are completely run off your donations and would appreciate any support that you can give. I'd like to thank Alex again. Thank you very much, Brain Police, for coming on the program. We look forward to having you on the next time. And
Definitely, man.
yeah. If you have any questions, comments, concerns for either Alex or myself, send them to getbusypodcast@gmail.com. I'll forward whatever questions, comments, concerns you might have to Alex on a case-by-case basis. But otherwise, thank you very much, listeners, and we'll check you next time. World peace.